Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to another virtual author event here with the Norwich Bookstore. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Sam. If you come to our store often, you might recognize me from behind the counter or running frantically around the store. And if I don't know you yet, nice to meet you. Thank you again for joining us, spending your Wednesday night with us. I am delighted to be here with two great New England authors and talking about a really exciting book from a wonderful Vermont publishing house, which we'll talk about a little bit in just a moment. We are here from the Norwich Bookstore. I wish we could be here in person at the store, but alas, circumstances prevent it. We are so glad you're joining us online. The Norwich Bookstore is a independent bookstore in Norwich, Vermont, here in the Upper Valley. We're located on Main Street in Norwich. We've been here since 1994. And we hope that if you're here in the Upper Valley, you'll come and pay us a visit one of these days. If you've not been in a while, now is a great time. And we'll post some information in the chat about us and about our hours, and we do hope to see you in the future. So thank you very much. Now, tonight we are here to celebrate a book, and the book is Horodno Burning. It's the new novel by Michael Freed-Thall. It is published by Rootstock Publishing, which is a Vermont publishing house. They're based in Montpelier. And we are very, very happy to have this book on our shelves here at the Norwich Bookstore. Now, tonight, if you enjoy the talk and you think, I need to pick up a copy of that, my uncle, my parents, my cousin, my friend would want a copy of that book, I'm going to post links in the chat to purchase this book. And I'm going to post links to purchase Ellen Meeropol's books as well. And I hope that you will support us and support these wonderful authors by purchasing books from us here at the Norwich Bookstore. Your book purchase is what keeps us going. It's what keeps us able to do these virtual events. And it is also what keeps the authors who you love writing and working and virtually and in person on the road. So again, we really encourage you to pick up a copy. We can ship a copy to you. We can have it available for porch pickup, or we can just have one on the shelves. You can come in and pick it up from our store. So we thank you so much for supporting us. Now, tonight we are going to do a conversation. Ellen and Michael are going to talk about Horodno Burning and the writing process. It's going to be a great time. All sorts of topics. I'm not sure what all they've got planned, but I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. And when we're done, we're going to do some Q&A. I know our audience always has great questions, and if you've got a question now or during the talk, put it in the chat or in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. I'll be watching that. We'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the event. And again, do keep them coming. I always enjoy seeing the questions that people have coming in. We have such a thoughtful and engaged crowd here. So do keep those questions coming. Now, if you enjoy tonight's talk and you think you'd like to see another author event with the Norwich Bookstore, you are in luck. We're doing many author events these days. We try and keep up a solid schedule of a couple per week. And there's sure to be something else on our schedule that you might enjoy. So do check us out, norwichbookstore.com. You can follow us on social media. You can sign up for our email newsletter. And no matter what, we hope to see you back here. We love what we do, and we couldn't do it without you. So we really hope that you'll join us again. And now, without further ado, I am delighted to welcome Michael Freed-Thall and Ellen Meeropol. Michael Freed-Thall retired from 30 years as a teacher and a principal in Vermont schools. He is a Vermont author, and after he retired, he took up writing, and after 7 years of false starts, rabbit hole despair, and bursts of inspiration, Horodno Burning emerged. It is his first novel. Here it is again. He started with pieces of his own family history, and ultimately it was those fragments and, as he claims, his overactive imagination that led him to write this novel, which is about literature, freedom, and Jewish survival. We are so glad to be carrying it on the shelves here at the Norwich Bookstore. And joining Michael Freed-Thall tonight in conversation is Ellen Meeropol. She is the author of the novels Her Sister's Tattoo, Kinship of Clover, On Hurricane Island, House Arrest, and the forthcoming novel, The Lost Women of Azalea Court, which is going to be coming out next year in 2022. Her work has been honored by the Sarton Women's Prize, the Women's National Book Association, and the Massachusetts Center for the Book. Recent essay publications include Lilith, LitHub, Guernica, The Writer's Chronicle, many more. And she joins us tonight from Northampton, Massachusetts. Please, from wherever you're joining us tonight, join me in giving a warm Upper Valley welcome to Michael Freed-Thall and Ellen Meeropol. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. And thanks to Norwich Bookstore for sponsoring this event. I'm going to start right out with a short reading, and I'll just set the scene a bit. The year is 1882. Conditions for Jews in the Pale Settlement has gotten much worse in the last year or two. Prior to this scene, there are pogroms and laws restricting Jewish rights being put out. And in this scene, one of the two protagonists, Esther Leving, known as Estes throughout the book, has been called in for an interview with the chief of state security in Horodno. And the reason is she's had an association, a friendship with another woman who has been involved in a violent act. I'll try not to give too much away, although it's all history. So I don't know if you can have a spoiler when it's in the history books. But I'm going to read the scene where Estes is being interviewed for the first time. And there's a reference to a crucifix a couple times. That's because the largest crucifix in Horodno is on the Catholic Basilica just across the street from the Office of State Security. Estes left the shop with her escort. They walked in silence in the direction of the river, the same route she and Professor Micah had taken on her first day of tutoring, half her lifetime ago. Nikolai stopped in front of the solid brick building on Police Street and opened a heavy door, its white paint curling away from the wood. He ushered her into a foyer where a self-important looking fellow with glasses halfway down his nose, lank, greasy hair combed over a bald head, and jowls sagging, sat at a desk in the corner. Benches lined the walls. Estes guessed from the unhappy faces of the occupants that they'd been here a while. "You won't wait with these petitioners," Nikolai said. "General Boroshenko left instructions to bring you straight in." She followed him into a narrow hall with offices on each side. He stopped at the fourth door on the right and tapped 3 times. "Come in," a deep voice, comfortable giving orders. Listen, but say little. Nikolai opened the door. "General Boroshenko," he said, bowing from the waist. "May I present Esther Leving Garfinkle." A short man, her father's age, with cropped gray hair, a hawk-like nose, thick mustache that concealed his upper lip, and unsympathetic blue eyes stood behind a desk. A window framed the crucified Jesus across Police Street. 2 rows of medals dangled from the general's chest. One sleeve, folded and pinned to his shoulder, indicated a missing arm. He stepped around his desk and surprised Estes when he took her hand in his. "Mrs. Garfinkle, or may I call you Esther?" "Mrs. Garfinkle is fine, General Boroshenko." "Of course. Please have a seat, Mrs. Garfinkle." He continued to hold her hand with a firm grip after she sat down. He studied her as seconds ticked away. Estes didn't want to look vulnerable. He released her hand and dismissed Nikolai. Boroshenko lifted a teapot from the copper samovar on his desk. He removed the lid, opened a spigot on the barrel of the urn, added hot water, stirred with a spoon, and filled 2 white ceramic cups. He passed the cup to Estes and their fingers met, her instinct to pull away foiled by the tea she balanced over her lap. General Boroshenko replaced the lid and teapot and sat across from her. Estes expected a formal interview, yet he drank in silence and watched her. Self-consciously, she sipped her tea and glanced at the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "You like my collection? Perhaps you can make some recommendations." He put his cup on the desk, stood, and pulled down a thin volume. Pavlova, achieved renown in the 40s, but is forgotten now. She lives in Dresden, I believe. A Double Life, her only novel. Yes, I've read it. Estes kept her voice flat. A review of the novel in Sovremennik had steered her to the book. The general returned to his chair. And what did you think of it? The structure is a bit contrived. How so? The separation of Sicily's traditional roles from her true desires into awake and dream states. You advocate for a more straightforward rebellion? In the case of women's literature, yes. I suppose looking at this work in context, it was advanced for the time. He set the book down. What did Pani Orzakova tell you about me? Estes froze. You can speak openly. Your friend's a Polish nationalist. It wouldn't be surprising if she harbored resentment towards one of the men who helped crush the rebellion. He looked at her expectantly. Best to give him something. That you executed rebels and had a reputation for ruthlessness among the Poles. He laughed. Losing sides nurture resentment, Mrs. Garfinkle. Easier than examining their own flawed cause. And what if they'd won? Every nationality in the empire would be clamoring for autonomy. We'd have chaos and violence. He reached past the samovar to retrieve a thin file. He held up a collection of newspaper clippings. Your letter is advocating clemency for Gessie Gelfman. Very impressive, Mrs. Garfinkle. Did you compose these on your own? Entirely. Is that why you brought me here, General? He put the articles back in the file. More tea? No, thank you. These editorials did bring you to our attention. Many high-ranking state officials also believed it wrong to execute a woman. Even Sofia Perovskaya had her supporters. He tilted forward and Estes recoiled. You're quite a beautiful woman, Mrs. Garfinkle. You have two lovely children, Solomon and Serafina, twins. Your husband's name is Bernard? Yes. Distillery owner. Excellent vodka, by the way. You must give him my compliments. And these boots, the most comfortable I've ever owned. He lifted one leg to show her. Let your father know I said so. Of course. Your husband boarded a train for Kiev with two companions 6 days ago. Please tell me the purpose of his trip. My aunt lives in Balta. He's going to make sure she and her family are safe. The pogroms, a nasty business. Without law and order, Russia can't survive. You're quite out of danger here, I can assure you. I've given the garrison orders to crush any disturbances. He made a fist and rapped his desk. I'll keep you and your family safe. You have my word, but will you do your part too, Mrs. Garfinkle? She nodded, not sure what he expected of her. Good. Now, concerning the articles you wrote, taken alone, I might accept them as innocent pleas for mercy. You're quite an effective advocate and should be proud of what you accomplished. Still, it's my job to judge your situation in its entirety, considering the security needs of the state. These are dangerous times, Mrs. Garfinkle. He shifted in his chair and lifted his fist off the desk. There are other aspects of your case that concern me. Your friendship with Eliza Polaska Orzakova, he held up a finger. Your involvement with her Vilna printing business, second finger joined the first. The possibility of radical literature housed in your bookshop, 3 fingers aimed straight at Estes's bosom. The fingers lingered, motionless, waiting for her response. She pressed her tongue against the roof of her mouth, a sealed vault. Most troubling of all, Mrs. Garfinkle, we also possess evidence you had direct correspondence with Gelfman before the assassination, as well as a relationship with her during the time she resided in Grodno. His 4th finger and thumb joined their mates. All my actions were motivated by friendship and compassion. She was my midwife. He put his hand on the table and smiled at her. Of course, Mrs. Garfinkle. We'll stop there. You don't want to give too much away. Ellen, I just want to say how I met Ellen Meeropol. I had been in this wonderful program, a writer-to-writer program with the Association of Writers in writing programs. And because I had such a good experience with that program, I started checking with mentors who I had a list of those, and Ellen to ask for a blurb for my book, and Ellen immediately said yes. She read the entire book and gave a very informed blurb. And then when I asked her if she'd like to be a conversation partner for tonight, no hesitation whatsoever, she immediately said yes as well. So I'm very pleased to be here with her tonight. And all you out in the audience, I can't see anybody on my screen, but I assume that I have writing friends, readers, neighbors, and family members out there, as well as probably Ellen has some as well. So welcome.
Thank you, Michael. So I love the section that you read. I particularly love that line. She pressed her tongue against the roof of her mouth, a sealed vault. Because this is a really charged moment for Estes, and it's an important point in the novel. Of course, that's what we novelists do. We put our characters in really difficult positions. We give them impossible choices. General Poroshenko is a really bad dude, and he's one with enormous power over Estes, her family, and her community. So she has to decide how to deal with him, whether or not to cooperate, whether or not to name names. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit, Michael, about this choice that you give her, coming to the choice. Did this part of the plot change as you got to know your characters better, as you did writing and rewriting and revision of the novel?
It actually did change. It was one thing that I had refused advice. I had some advice, you know how we're supposed to give our characters flaws. Having her actually cooperate in any way to name names was a flaw too far for me. And part of that was because I was bringing my own life experience to the writing. When I was growing up, my parents were involved in progressive causes. They had been arrested for peace marches and working for civil rights and so on. And I grew up with the FBI kind of snooping around the house, coming to the door, going through our trash. And one thing I've always felt really good about is my parents never spoke with them. In fact, I can remember distinctly one time, I must have been about 8, FBI agent came to the house. I wasn't sure who he was, but I had a hunch. And I opened the door and I think he said, "Are your parents at home?" And before I could even answer, my mother swooped over, said, "We have enough of those already," and slammed the door in his face. So that made a big impression on me. So to have a character who actually is going to give names was a really hard thing to come upon. But I think when I stopped inserting myself into the story and just let the character make that decision, it was a choice that then became imperative, I think. Yeah. She was facing prison and other dire circumstances. And I just didn't think it was realistic that she would allow herself to be separated from her family. So,
Okay.
but that was a difficult thing. It's interesting because you mentioned these impossible situations, and right off the bat, writing about Jewish life in the Pale Settlement, because of the threat of violence and the restrictive laws, there's that immediate external difficult situation that history kind of handed me.
Mhm.
And then even within the Jewish community, I found that there was all kinds of stress and between various religious factions, the Hasids and their opponents, and then between the religious Jews and those who wanted a more enlightened, educated life with secular learning. And that conflict continued during these tough times when some people thought emigration was the way to go, particularly to America. Others thought we can stay and ride this out. Still others thought join the revolutionary movements in Russia. And then within a family, the question, the point of tension, conflict really became, is love enough to overcome pretty profound differences in education, religion, and political views? And that question is one that I think comes out and is answered through the novel, through the story.
Great. And, one of the strengths of this novel is the historical setting that you allude to. The Pale of Settlement, the anti-Semitism, and the social inequity are palpable on every page. The details are really rich, but they don't overwhelm the story. So bravo. There are different ways of approaching the research necessary for a historical novel. Some writers research before they write a word, and others write the story first and then do the research. Tell us about your process in balancing the research and your imagination to write this book.
I think because I didn't really know what the story was, it was hard to know what to research. So I just pretty much put a camera on the character's forehead and tried to see what they would do. And so I think intuitively developing the characters first was something I had to do. And then once I had a feeling for who they were, then I had to start reading 19th century novels, some for the second time, some for the first time, because one of the characters is a bibliophile. And I had to learn the history. I had to learn a lot about the Jewish religion, because I did not grow up in a religious family. So there were, the technology. How did where could you go on a train in middle of 19th century Russia? How did they communicate? Did they have telegraph yet? So a lot of those things probably would have been good to research first, because they tend to interrupt the writing as you go along. And particularly, I'd go down a lot of rabbit holes where I'd spend the whole day and say, what have I been doing? Maybe spending hours and hours and hours learning about how you make vodka, when the average reader is not going to really care about that. And a lot of that background information never even finds its way into the book. So from an efficiency point of view, probably the way I approached it wasn't so great. I'm curious, with your book, My Sister's Tattoo, it takes place about 100 years after Horodno Burning. And I'm wondering if researching something from the 1960s, when we were both around, was harder or easier than going back to the 19th century?
Probably both. I mean, I had the advantage with the book of having lived through a lot of the events. The book starts at a big anti-Vietnam War demonstration in 1968. So, I lived through a lot of those events as a young adult and participated. And I had the additional luck of having written in a journal for many of those years, and having had a friend who saved all of my letters, and she sent them back to me. So that was a kind of research that was very personal. But I still had to do the book research. I still had to read the books that talked about that era. And I had to interview people. One of my main characters is underground and then in prison. So I had friends who were underground and in prison, and they could give me the kind of details that are just so precious to a writer, those small details that really take the reader to the place. But like you in general, I write a first draft from imagination and see where the story goes, and then do the research necessary to make it as accurate and as real as possible. Your novel is an homage to books, to the power of reading and writing. And it's interesting because in the novel, as the political situation worsens, Estes' daughter asks her a really important question. She says, "Mama, why don't you do something about this besides reading books and writing stories?" And Estes then echoes that thought to herself. What difference had she and her friends made by writing? And I think that's a big question in your novel. What difference do books, reading and writing make in our larger and very disturbing political moment? What do you think about that? And how did you feel about weaving this question into your work?
Mm-hmm. I think in the 19th century, it could make a big difference. And I think both on a global scale, if you think of Karl Marx, for example, and think about somebody being able to write a theory today that would change the world as much as his ideas did. But also on a smaller level, you think about the Dreyfus Affair and Émile Zola being able to change the trajectory of that. And one of my historical figures, Gessie Gelfman, a real woman of the 19th century, she was granted a reprieve from execution because of the letters that people wrote, including Victor Hugo. So I think in the 19th century, there wasn't so much out there, so that when somebody wrote something, it had a louder, echo. It seems like today with alternative facts, that it's very hard to break through with writing. I like to think that engaging fiction can help us through troubling times. And to that end, I'd like to read something my mentor with the Writer-to-Writer program, Lex Wilford, said, which really struck me. It was part of a blurb. He said, "Words and stories can change us, save us, give us hope, make us more human, more humane." And maybe that's why we write. Maybe we're not going to change the world, but maybe we'll change ourselves, and we're another person. So
Maybe we will change the world.
Maybe we will. I found that very hopeful, anyways.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you at least one more question before we let the audience ask you some questions. And that is about another place in this book that I really love. Estes is discussing a contemporary book about the status of women with her uncle, who is a mentor to her. He praises the book, but Estes replies, quote, "The writing is terrible. Placing these worthy ideals within a poor novel, why serve wedding cake in the outhouse. I love that line. And I wonder how you went about balancing these big ideas, these quote worthy ideals, with good craft, and whether you sometimes felt that they were battling with each other.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, the big themes sort of emerged through the story. That my primary attention while I was writing was on the characters, telling a good story, developing that. And I think as I went along, oh yeah, there's a trend here, you know, about books and about art, and how important they are to one of the characters, and how important they are to us, as Lex said, to make us more human and more humane. But I don't think I started out with the idea and say, okay, I'm going to illustrate this idea through the story. I think it happened the other way around. I think the danger, and I think the book that you referenced, Chernyshevsky's What Is to Be Done, I mean, he clearly had an agenda. And, you know, he wrote a profound book in terms of the times and the treatment of women's issues, and revolutionary ideas. But he didn't do it through this, you know, he started with that was in the forefront. So a very didactic type of book. And, you know, if I could sell as many books as he did, maybe I would have tried that approach, but.
Well, I just want to mention one thing, you know.
I was going to ask you the same question. How do you balance, because My Sister's Tattoo has some very profound ideas in it. Did you start with those, or did you start with the story?
No, I didn't start with the ideas at all either. The themes really grow out of the trouble you put your main characters in, and their own efforts to react to their situation. Looking back, of course, I can see how some of the themes in all of my novels are things that I care about a lot in the world, which is no big surprise, you know, when you think about it. But I've never really started with any kind of thematic scaffolding for a novel. It's usually a character or a situation or, you know, a what if. You had mentioned earlier, Michael, that I immediately agreed to read the book. And one of the things that struck me when you told me a little bit about it was how similar our backgrounds are. And so that was certainly one of the things that drew me to the material. You know, we both have main characters named Esther. Both of them have fathers who are shoemakers. They're both, they both come from from the same area of the world. Actually, my maternal grandparents came from Oman, one of the villages that you mention in the book. So, and I think our histories are important, and history does enrich fiction. And both of the books put the main character in a situation where they must weigh and balance two very powerful human urges. One, to try to change the world, and the other to protect their family, the people they love and feel responsible for. And I think that a lot of fiction does look at the sort of two sides of a choice, of a decision. just for a moment before we go to audience questions, tell us a little bit about the cover image, because it's such a striking image.
Well, the cover image is a painting called Flying Carriage by Marc Chagall. It was painted in 1913. And he grew up in the Pale Settlement, maybe a few hundred miles from Horodno. He was to the east. And many of his, much of the inspiration for his work came from his early experiences living there. The richness of folk art, the themes of transcendence and trauma, which was so familiar, in Jewish history. So in a lot of ways, it was just, and the actual painting could almost be an illustration of a scene in the book. So once I saw that, I said, that has to be the cover. And it was a bit of a challenge because to get the rights to a painting of an artist who has not been dead for, I think it's 80 or 100 years, I'm not sure, is a bit of a challenge. So he died in 86. So I had to jump through quite a few hoops. Took several months to get the rights to use that. But
yeah,
I'm glad I did.
Good. Should we go to some questions from our friends out there who we can't see?
Sure.
Well, thank you both, and thanks to everyone who's been posting in the chat and the Q&A, and Ellen, thank you for holding up that cover image. It is a great cover. You can see it here as well, and really definitely a thoughtfully chosen and designed cover. So thank you for telling us a little bit about it, Michael. We've got some great questions here. Let's see. First question is about Estes has a club foot, and Lee Allison in the Q&A asks, why does she have a club foot, and did you feel that that had to do with her needing to be flawed in some way? What can you tell us about that decision?
Well, that could be because I think in the very first draft, I'm not sure I don't think she had the club foot. So it was something that came along later. I think her sense of isolation, being a brilliant woman in a culture in Russia where women, really can't fulfill those high intellect roles very easily. And even within the Jewish culture, which values so much reading and books, it was the men who went off to synagogue, it was the boys who went off to school, and the girls often learned at home from their mothers or from a tutor that was hired. So I think the clubfoot sort of fit into that sense of isolation, being different, and so on. And yeah, having a flaw.
Mm-hmm.
Lex is here with a question in the chat. And what he asks is, in an earlier draft of the novel, you had a book, thinks maybe Jane Eyre, if I remember right, save Estes' life quite literally. And he says, I love that moment, but understand it might have been a bit incredible. I'm wondering why you made the change.
I think Lex answered that. I think it just seemed a little too fantastic and maybe a little too much of a setup, like she takes the book out of her bag, she puts it inside her dress next to her heart, and that somehow miraculously, saves her life. It felt a little too contrived when I liked it too, and it was hard to take it out, which is a whole other topic of how do you cut. Maybe Ellen wants to comment on this too, but with 5 novels, I'm sure that she's had to do a lot of cutting, and sometimes the things you cut you really like. But I felt that had to go for authenticity.
Nothing is ever lost, though. So things that you cut from one book, if they're really important to you, sometimes end up in another. And I had to cut a whole thread from her sister's tattoo. But actually a very similar story is part of my forthcoming novel. So anything that we cut because it doesn't fit should always be saved in a outtakes file, because you never know when it might spark its own story or be useful. We do have to cut stuff that we love because it doesn't fit, it doesn't work, it for whatever reason. But who knows, Michael, you may end up writing speculative fiction next, and it would be a perfect setup for a less realistic piece of writing.
I love that. I've definitely heard from several novelists over the years who have created whole books out of characters or ideas that just didn't work in the book they'd written before, and that's so great to hear you talk about. On that subject, Michael, I remember in doing some of kind of my research for this talk tonight that you had gone through several titles for this book. Is that
That's true. And again, I have to credit my writer-to-writer mentor with this title. This was his suggestion, and it was a great one. The book had originally been called Garfinkle Spirits, and some people liked that, but I got a lot of pushback from some family members who weren't too crazy about it. And Lex suggested Horodno Burning, and it stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You had a question in the chat about your research, and was there anything that was surprising or disappointing or uplifting? I mean, I think surprising is a good one to I think to start with. But when you were doing research for this book, what did you learn?
I learned a lot about the ebb and flow of conditions for Jews in the Pale Settlement. So actually, I won't go into it now. I think people start zooming off of our program if I did, but basically under Tsar Alexander II, conditions were getting better. It was sort of the Jews were very supportive of him because he was increasing rights. I mean, it was still horrible, but compared to what came before and what was after, it was much better. His philosophy was he was an autocrat, but the philosophy was, well, if I give freedoms and benefits from above, they won't be demanded from below, not because it's the right thing to do, but because we don't want to have a revolution. But I learned that things had been improving. And then when he was assassinated, spoiler alert, 1881, that's when things exploded with pogroms, and his son was a very brutal man. He didn't like Jews at all, and they started passing laws on top of after the pogroms. The Jews were blamed for the violence, and things just got worse from there.
Mm-hmm.
Got a question from Steve in the Q&A who says, was glad that you talked about so early on in the conversation tonight about your resistance to Estes naming names, this pivotal point in the book, but says, I still wonder why that naming of names didn't haunt her for the rest of her life. Can you talk about that at all?
Well, I think it does haunt her. She's and a lot of years later, she's still reciting those names. I mean, she's thinking about it, and it's clear that after she gives those names, it's like it's burning her tongue. So I think she is haunted. But life goes on, and she has a life to live, and there's not much she can do about it at that point.
You know, I also think, Michael, that when you give a character a really difficult choice like that, fiction is really good at asking those questions, and readers often think about those questions. What would I do if I were in Estes' situation? How would I handle it if I had two kids at home and I was being asked? It was really clear that I was being threatened if I didn't answer the questions. So however you as the writer choose to answer it in the book, the reader is also given it as a big question, a general question. And I think that's one of the ways that fiction can make a difference.
Right.
Fiction can ask us to step into somebody else's shoes and think about their lives and how we might have reacted in that situation.
I think there's a reason why when people are charged with crimes, they just about always cooperate with the prosecution. I mean, there's very few who do not. And I mean, the penalty would have been severe. She would have been separated from her family. She would have been doing hard labor in Siberia. In your book, Ellen, it's a little different because it's two sisters. So it's within the same family. Estes doesn't actually know these people. They're just names on it that, you know, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it easier, but it's a little less gut wrenching than when you have, it's between two sisters in your book.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Liz that I would like to, I'm excited to know the answer to as well. And I suspect that Liz might be related to you because she says, which branch of our family did you choose to research and how? And I have heard that bits and pieces of the inspiration for this story came from your family history. So I would love to hear about that too.
I better answer this correctly. Well, I had interviewed actually a number of my relatives on my father's side, a very politically active family from New York. There's no question about where they stand on issues. And certainly the political piece of the book was certainly, I think, inspired by my father's family. On my mother's side, they actually came from Horodno and Vilna. And that probably would have been more of the Bernard character. You know, they were more, I think, traditional, spoke Yiddish, and so on. Although my mom herself was very progressive because she had the influence of some progressive cousins. So, but I'm going to plead both sides of the family.
Got a good question. Another good question about making edits and making cuts. Margaret says, I remember you saying that you had many more pages, and she's wondering, did you cut large pieces of time out of the narrative? And if so, when and where?
Yeah, I don't think it was so much time as it was extended scenes, or, for example, I play a lot of chess. So there's some chess in the book, but it's not overdone. At one point, it was probably quite overdone. And I heard from readers who thought chess was kind of boring, that, you know, you got to cut some of this. And so there's quite a bit of that taken out. Some of the school scenes, I thought there was enough in there to give the reader a flavor, you know, the ambiance of what it was like without having to add scenes. Some of the secondary characters, one of my favorites in the book is Lieb. And I had an extended scene where he was the main character in the scene. And that had to go. So at one point, the book was 125,000 words. Ellen will laugh because she knows no publisher is going to take that. It ended up at 93. And some of the stuff that went, I've heard, oh, why did you cut that? But overall, I think the book moves a lot better and will be interesting to a wider swath of readers.
A question about some of the kind of the back matter in the book. John wants to know, at which point did you make the decision to add a glossary?
That I credit Rootstock with. They set me up with a really good editor, Mark Greenberg, and he suggested I have a glossary, maps, a timeline. I even added the suggested reading and so on. And I think it made the book stronger because it is a historical novel. So I think that adds that element of authenticity to it. I also had some excellent advice to get some narrative distance, because when I first started to write, I was being fairly pretty much a novice in a lot of ways, particularly writing novels. I thought I had a hue super close to the characters. It was going to be a close third person, and I was not going to give an inch of distance from that character. But when you do that, it's kind of like a fish in the ocean. The fish doesn't know it's in the ocean. It's just swimming along. So by pulling back at 4 or 5, 6 places in the book, I could give sort of the overview of what was happening historically, culturally, and then slowly come back down into the character. So I really had some excellent advice. And in a way, this book is a community project from the Burlington Writers Workshop that got me going with writing, to the writer-to-writer program, to the help I got from Rootstock. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the maps as well. These great maps in the front of the book, and so really well done. Great job, Rootstock.
I have to credit Tim Newcomb for the maps.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you so much. A question that I've gotten a few times here, and I think now is the time to ask it. Are you working on something new? What's next?
Well, I'll go first, but then I want to hear from Ellen. I actually am. I signed up for a novel in a year class, partly because the book took like 3 years to write, but 4 years to edit. And spending so much time in the edit mode, I wasn't sure I could write again. So I signed up for this it's kind of a boot camp, write a novel in a year with 7 other people. And it's being facilitated by Diane Zinna, who Ellen knows, who started the writer-to-writer program. And she's a novelist herself. And that starts January 1st. So that's some dedication. So no New Year's party for me. The morning of January 1st. And what I'm thinking, the next book, I was intrigued by Sarah, the character Sarah. So I wanted to go back and kind of look at that pivotal event, from her point of view. And then most of the novel will take place in New York. And it's going to be a lot about courage and redemption. So at least that's what I'm thinking now. But once you start writing, things can take funny turns. So. And Ellen, how about you?
Well, things do take really funny turns. That's absolutely true. 4 years ago, I moved to a condo in Northampton on the grounds of the old state mental hospital. And at the time, I was working on a novel that was not going anyplace. It was set, I don't even remember where it was set. I knew the main characters, but it just, sometimes you just don't have the juice flowing. The minute I moved here and started learning about Northampton State Hospital, I knew, sometimes I think that the ghosts of this place just insisted, but I knew that the next novel had to be set here and that the history of the state hospital had to somehow be the backstory. And that book is now finished. I'm still in the sort of final copy editing and those kinds of things, but it'll be out in 2022. So, you know, as to what comes next, well, we'll see. But that's the next project to come out into the world. And some of those darlings that I killed and cut from her sister's tattoo have new life in this book.
Cool. And that's why we keep an outtakes file.
You got it.
Well, thank you both so much. And I was looking to see if we had a pre-order link for Ellen for your new book yet. Not quite yet, but we'll definitely have it available on our website as soon as that happens. And very exciting to hear that you both got new projects in the wings. And as a reminder, you can order Horodno Burning. There's a link in the chat, and you can also order all of Ellen's wonderful books. And the most recent novel is Her Sister's Tattoo, which we've got on the shelves now here at the Norwich Bookstore. And definitely, as you guys were talking about, I think sort of a link thematically in a lot of ways between the two books. So pick them up both, enjoy them, read them together back to back. Thank you so much to both of you for this wonderful evening, and I really enjoyed listening. I think everyone else did as well. As a reminder, we hope that you'll support these great authors by purchasing their books. We've got links in the chat. We can send books all over the country or have them available for pickup here at the Norwich Bookstore. Michael Freed-Thall's new novel is Horodno Burning. It is out from Rootstock Publishing, wonderful Vermont publishing house. Thank you so much, Michael Freed-Thall, Ellen Meeropol. Thank you for spending your evening with us. And to all of you out there listening, thank you for being here. Do good work, read good books, be safe, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, Sam.